Hello and welcome to a new episode of Pat's Chat. Today I'm very honored to have Garry Chow with me. Hi Garry, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much, Patrick, for inviting me to your famous Pet Chat.
Not famous yet, not as famous as you, Garry. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man. You're the CEO of Asia Mediation Center. You're co-founder and founder of a couple of other businesses. You're coach and mentor, especially for TEDx speakers, Toastmaster International also. You're an expert on EQ and mediation. That's the topics we want to talk about today. But before that, I of course want to know, as always, who you are. So how do you describe yourself as a person, Garry?
I would describe myself as a KL boy. KL stands for Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I was born and raised in KL. Over the years, I traveled to different parts of the world. So in the course of my studies at the universities in UK, and after that, in the course of my work to Europe, US, and various countries in the Asia as well.
Okay, cool.
And I'm currently based in PJ and work from here. And before the pandemic of COVID-19, I used to fly to different parts of the world, including the Middle East, to facilitate mediation, training, and coaching as well.
Okay, interesting. So when you hear about mediation, the coaching, you studied law, so you are like a certified lawyer also. Does this have anything to do with your childhood? Were you like a difficult kid where your parents had to go through some struggle to to help you grow?
Yeah, interesting why I pick up law. It's a interesting childhood that I had. My late father, he was from the Air Force. He used to work in the Air Force. He joined the Air Force before Malaysians had its independence, and he stayed on until after the independence, and he opted for retirement. So, being a soldier, they are trained to use forces. Yeah, they use force to defend the country. Right, and the way he managed us, I have two younger brothers, the family, it's like managing an army camp.
Okay.
I'm not sure how can you relate to that. So he'll be very strict, and usually he will ask. Well, rather he will, if anything happens in terms of like us being naughty or being disobedient, right? He will punish first, and then he asks questions.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
So growing up in that environment, I was thinking, oh, that's not fair. And because I had that upset through my growing up years of like feeling the injustice and unfairness. So the first choice of studies, I opted to read law. So having read law, thinking that I could argue with my father to say that, oh, you're wrong. But I realized that it's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about the relationship between father and son, right? How that's being cultivated, and and how does that could make a family a harmonious family. So and later I realized more when I study about neuroscience, right? And neuroscience is basically something about how the brain influence our behavior, right? And the hormones that influence us psychologically as well. So I realized that it could be at that time he did not know any way better to do it as a parent, because right, if you realize by now, or most fathers or mothers realize by now, you do not have a manual after you give birth to a child, right? How to educate your children effectively. There's no proper manual being given. Just like when you buy a vacuum cleaner or you buy, they give you a manual, right? But not when you have a child. So I realized that it's not their fault. It's just
Mm.
because they did not know how to do it any better.
Of
So with
course.
their realization, I have a very good conversations with him and my late mother as well before they pass away. So in psychology, we call it a closure. In other language, probably we call it as a completion, so that we emotionally we would not continue to have that upset with them. So I'm happy
Interesting. Yeah.
about, yeah, how things turn out, because like they say, everything happens for a reason. So my so-called bad childhood leads me to understand about more about human being, about mankind, about humanity, about how our brain works, right? For us to behave or manage our emotions differently. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's good to hear that comes to a closure. But as you mentioned, you studied law because of that, because you wanted to be able to argue. But then eventually you figured out that that's not what you really wanted to do. I think your first job was more into journalism, so you moved in,
Yeah,
become a journalist first at the Star Media.
that's
What
right.
is the reason for that? You never practiced law in the end.
Yes, correct. After I came back to Malaysia, instead of practicing law, actually I became a journalist at the Star newspaper. It was interesting choice because at the time, Malaysia judiciary has a form of crisis, judiciary crisis at the time. The Tun Saleh Abbas Lord President's issue. A lot of my seniors at the time who were practicing, so they were crying, uh, um, about the injustice and all kind of issue or allegations on certain parties. So I was thinking, like, okay, how could I channel my opinion apart from them, just talking about it at the mama stalls, right? How could I express it better or to highlight matters in such matter? So I have friends who happens to be working at the Star newspaper, so they said, why not, join us? So I thought, okay. So I went for interview, and after that, the editor hired. So that's how I became a journalist. And that was also an interesting experience because most people would think it's an easy job. They just go and ask someone some questions, and then they will give you answers, and you write a report, and that's it. Uh, uh, I learned it the hard way. Because it's not so simple, it's not so straightforward. As a journalist, I believe most newbies or new journalists will agree with me. It's not so straightforward. Not everybody are willing to answer any questions that you ask them.
Yeah.
For now, looking back, right, I understand, but at that time I don't. Right, why people doesn't want to be interviewed? Right now, looking back, and since I studied more about human behaviors, I realized that, oh, okay, everyone have their own reason for doing something. So if you are very eager to get a media attention, for example, if you're a singer, if you're a movie star, you love the publicity, great. Whenever a journalist want to interview you, you will love to accept that invitation and share. However, if you happen to be in a certain crisis and if you do not know how to deal with it effectively, right, that's where they would avoid the media because they doesn't want the media to highlight the issue.
Yeah, of
Uh,
course.
mm. But sadly, there's actually a misconception because, right, how you handle a situation during the crisis, right, it's not about avoiding the crisis, it's about how you share with the public in your role or capacity as a leader of an organization. How could you manage that effectively? How do you deal with it? It shows a professionalism, it shows your leadership skills, it shows your capability and competencies. So it's actually a good opportunity for an organization whenever they are in crisis to step up, right,
Yeah.
and then to represent who they are, in their stand and the commitment for the organizations and how they intend to resolve the crisis.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Okay.
it's a better approach. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. But of course, I can understand that also needs training or coaching, mentoring, obviously, because well, if everything runs fine, you're on a high, you're successful, then it's easier to talk about things, right? Than when you're in a crisis or things go really wrong. I think we can come back to that a little bit later when we go through some examples that you had in mediation also. First,
Mm.
let me dig into the topic of EQ, because that's also one of the topics that you're very strong in. And
Mm.
we just discussed before, EQ is like, for me, has become a little bit like a hype word. Like in technology, you have these hype words and everyone is using it. And so EQ is now everywhere. And this stands for emotional quotient. Many people use it as emotional intelligence also. Is that used interchangeably? And can you give us like maybe a rough overview or an idea how you define EQ?
Okay, yeah, sure. That is a interesting say area to talk about because EQ it actually has been around for ages. It's just that it wasn't being highlighted, and it was only uh, made popular, or rather being noticed when Dr. Daniel Goleman wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, and people start to pick up that book and read about it, and then have that awareness about what EQ is all about. Having said that, not all leaders or not everyone actually understood it fully, because they will assume that, oh, it's just that you're good in handling emotions, then your EQ is high. Right. So what is EQ? A lot of people collapse EQ with IQ. Why do I say that? Through the years of my work as a mediator, as a coach in emotional intelligence, a lot of leaders, when you ask them, right, do you think your EQ is high? Right, they will say their EQ is high. Then I ask them why. So this is an interesting, simple test. So they say, oh, because right, my IQ is very high. Then how do you know that your IQ is high? They will say that, oh, because I have a degree in a certain areas, and then I have masters in business, and then I have a PhD. So, and I am able to resolve a lot of problems, and I am the CEO of my company. So, thus, I believe my IQ is high. And because of that, I also think that my EQ is high too. So this is actually a misconception because, right, when your IQ is high, your EQ does not automatically follow your level of IQ, right? Because the reason being, EQ is a measure of our emotion and also feelings. So the most interesting and best definitions that I like about EQ is by Dr. Daniel Goleman as well. Right, he says like is about understanding our own feelings and emotion, and understand about other people's feelings and emotions. So if you have a better understanding of your own feelings and emotions and other people's feeling and emotion, that means your EQ is higher. But if you does not understand a lot about yourself in terms of feelings and emotions and others, that means your EQ is actually lower. So a good measure, a good way to test whether someone have a higher EQ or lower EQ, instead of just sitting down and do an assessment, is to listen to their choice of word. So how do you measure someone's EQ is higher or lower? Is through the choice of word that they use, especially at the workplace. So, for example, if you are managers, right, they work at the factory production line, and if someone is like struggling to do their work, right, and you listen to what they have to say. So, I give you two examples, right? One example of someone who does not have a higher EQ, someone who have someone who does. So, someone who does not have a high EQ, their choice of word would be, look at you. How come you're so slow? Like that, also, you do not know how to do. So, although that managers are saying it, in order to ensure that the productivity and the person is actually doing his or her work, but he or she, the manager, may not realize that choice of word could hurt the person's individual's feelings and emotions. So on the other hand, if someone have a high EQ would say, right, looks like you are struggling, right? How may I help you, right, to ensure that you are not facing these challenges now or even future. So the choice of word is to support, is to empathize to that person instead of like saying that, like that, how come you're so slow? And then, like that also you do not know how to do. So it's like a form of criticism. In a normal conversation, if you're so used to that choice of words, then you will not feel that it's hurting people's feelings or emotion. But in fact, it does in the long run, especially subconsciously, people may not know it. Parents to their children also will have a similar effect. If the parents keep on using the choice of word that is harsh, right, over a long period of time, their children would be usually, according to research, tend to be more negative rather than positive thinking. So you wanted to say something, Sasha?
Yeah, that's no. I am listening. Well, of course, I have a lot of questions, but it makes a lot of sense, and I get an understanding for that. I also read that Goldman, he is in the opinion that like emotional intelligence is like far more important for like the performance in leaders than the IQ. I mean, he says like he sees like 2/3 EQ or EI versus 33% IQ, while others says, as I mentioned before, well, EQ has no impact at all on the leaders, which I also disagree. But what's your point on this? Do you think it's more like a 50-50 or both equally important?
Well, in my personal opinion, I believe it is 50-50. I can understand why he say that, because he want to emphasize the importance of understanding about people's feelings and emotions. Because right, without that understanding of the feelings and emotions of another person, we tend to create certain resentments or ill feelings when we are at work. So that is like hindering the whole productivity at the workplace. And that's why I think he says it's more important, is more than 50% in terms of the importance. But personally, I believe it's 50-50. The reason being is that you need a balance in terms of your competencies. You need to have a certain knowledge, you need to have certain skills, and then certain attributes. So attributes is where EQ come in to help you to have a better attributes in terms of your performance or your competency at the workplace. Because if you do not have a positive attributes, you tend to be very sarcastic at the workplace. You tend to like act as if you know it all, and then the choice of what you say is like that. Also, you do not know, you stupid or what. So that kind of attributes obviously is hindering rather than supportive at the workplace. So I suppose that's why he would say it's definitely need more than that. And another misconception about EQ and IQ I want to highlight, I feel that is pertinent, is that a medical doctor I met, right, he can like explains the definitions of EQ and how EQ works. And when you finish explaining the whole thing about what EQ is all about, right, obviously his IQ is high enough to express and explain what EQ is. When someone asks him a question right after his explanation, and then he says, "Ah, yeah, like that also you don't know, man." So, isn't that interesting? You are a medical doctor who explains everything about EQ, and then after that, your choice of word, as in, like, what you say is actually does not create a encouraging feeling to the person who asks you a question. So it's a good indication of someone who have high IQ, but the EQ is not so high.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what?
I understand. I
Yeah.
understand. It's a lot about the social skills, empathy, motivation, also that
Mm.
are covered in EQ. And we have a lot of discussion, especially when it comes to technology and AI, artificial intelligence. And I mean, that is always one of the topics that we say, like, okay, EQ might become even more important in the future because that is what separates us or makes us better than robots or machines. That's something they cannot learn for the moment. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. AI has been used to like respond and answers specific questions, which is like it make our work and life easier. What they haven't robot haven't managed to replace human is the EQ, because they do not, unless you program it intelligent enough to read the human behavior. In order for them to respond according to that emotions or feelings, then there will be intelligence enough to close to human behavior. But otherwise, they have not reached that level yet.
Yeah,
Yes, answer your questions. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
With few robot would not be at the human level yet.
Okay,
Mm.
okay, interesting. And I read another interesting statement that you made in either in one of the posts or in your profile that you feel that there's not enough emphasis in education for EQ, right? It's not taught enough.
Yes.
What is your suggestions or your idea around that? How schools can really like embrace that a bit more or teach it even more?
Mm. Uh, yes. Um, I've noticed that in certain countries, they do take note of about mental health. So those countries who take note more about mental health, they actually will start to emphasize and put emotional intelligence as a part of the content of some of the subjects in their educations in the schools. For example, there's a research done by a school in Japan. Among the primary school of this particular research that they were doing, right? They asked the students, their primary school children, to write about a one page or so journal about their feelings, about their emotions. How do you feel about your day? They were encouraged to express about their feelings, about their emotions. If you feel sad, write about why were you feeling sad and what's the reason for you to feel that way. So with a lot of encouragement, and then for them to write that down in their journal, and then they were given opportunity to share it in the class. And the teacher's role is very important during that process because right, it is not to laugh and make fun of them when they share about their feelings and emotions, so that they are encouraged to support each other in whatever feelings they were having. So if someone is sad because of their grandparents passed away, so they were encouraged to express it out. They're encouraged to let the emotions out. But of course, they were not encouraged to indulge in that emotions. Especially if you are sad, you're not encouraged to indulge in to continue to cry for hours. But you're encouraged to cry, to shed tears, and then be in touch with that sadness. And then after that, right, learn how to overcome that sadness rather than like indulge in it and then you get into depression. So those will go into the area of psychology where some people will have a what they call it depression. Here, the teacher's role is very important in supporting uh, the students' emotion. So there is a good example of how emotional intelligence subject right can be incorporated into schools for them to understand more about feelings and emotions. If you notice, like many countries yeah, do not have that kind of a topic or subject to encourage them to look into their feelings and emotions.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
interesting. I think there's might be a big difference in countries between different countries how the approach is and what they really do. So let's leave the EQ for the moment. Thanks so much already for giving your ideas and insights on that. Let's move to mediation, and I would like to ask you first the same question. If you can give us a quick explanation on how you define mediation, please.
Okay. Mediations is a process for parties to be able to settle outside the court for any disagreement or dispute that they have. It is different from another form of like informal process of a tribunal or arbitration. So why is it different? Because tribunal and arbitrations, they adopt similar process as the court, whereby a judge will preside on the matter and will listen to both parties, and the judge will say, okay, who's right and who's wrong. So right person win, wrong person lose the case. So thus it's a win-lose situation. It's not good or bad. It's just a matter how the structure and the nature of the process is. In mediations, the mediator will encourage both parties to come to an agreement so that both parties also can have a win-win situation.
Okay.
So it's not about who's right and wrong purely, but it's about encouraging them to come to an agreement. For example, they have a dispute in their contract, and they realize that they got themselves into a bad deal only after they start to perform the contract. So thus, someone breached the contract, and then they got into a dispute. So as a mediator, what we can do is to help them, right, to come to an discussions on even negotiations or to change the terms of the contract so that both parties can actually would not suffer, or one or both parties would not suffer in that situation. So when they come to an agreement, so it's become legally binding. So it's a very good process to shorten the legal proceeding, to have a privacy, and then to have a win-win situations. Being a practitioner in neuroscience is also from the perspective of emotion, it's actually a better closure in terms of emotions as well. So because if you go to court, someone wins, someone loses, the person who loses will still have a negative feelings towards the person who won the case. But in mediations, actually, it's a win-win.
Interesting. Yeah. I like that. Sorry, interrupted you. Yeah, but I really like that definition. Right, in court, you have a winner, you have a loser. With mediation, your target is to have two winners, right? Which will find a solution together. Someone helps them, like the mediator, as you mentioned. But when we look at, I mean, I can understand that maybe the root of that was like law, because there you have the most of the disputes. But nowadays, I think there is a lot of disputes also outside the courtroom. I would say, especially also in social media or other areas. What are some of the cases that you come across that you see is quite interesting, and you were able to successfully like mediate in the end?
Situations that interesting that I've seen on social media. For example, when someone highlighted a certain issue, right? Not directly at the party involved, but on the matter that they were faced with. So, but the opposite party actually reacted, feeling that the person is attacking them. And because of when someone, it's natural, if someone attack you, you will want to be defensive. And then when you defend yourself, you will say things that sometimes because of emotion, right, that could be hurtful, and things when it's the words that are hurtful being lashed out, right, you cannot actually take it back because it's already heard or read by the person, and the person who feelings will be hurt by it. So you cannot take back that words because it's already received, or just like when you take a sword and cut someone, you cannot uncut someone. Yeah. So same goes with sometimes conflict that happens even on social media or at the workplace between family members and business partners. It's very common. And it happens and someone says something harsh, and then that person felt hurt. because of the emotional outbursts, and things got into worse.
Mm-hmm.
If you understand some more about feelings and emotions, and then you understand more about conflict management or resolution, right? You tend not to jump into conclusions first. What you can do, some of the approach best adopted is to first clarify, right? When you say this, right, what do you mean, right? And does that things that you say, is it within the context of this conversation? Because if you do not clarify, you will jump to conclusion that another person is attacking us. So, and secondly, having clarified, and then you actually got opportunity to respond um, in a calm manner, so that you would not be affected by emotions, and thus it allows opportunity to resolve that conflict. So in social medias, recently I also posted in my LinkedIn posting, and then it's actually a lot of people responded and commented on it as well. Yeah, so I share about a media website, because I used to be in advertising, as
Mm-hmm.
they analysts with as we described talked about earlier. Right, being a media portal, it's important to respond to comment, so that you do not lead people to misunderstand your intentions, or uh, the rationale behind the article that you're writing. So someone wrote about a listing by a media portal, and then the owner of the media portal actually responded emotionally. And then, from my observations, I noticed that he actually misconstrued the highlights of the comment. So because he misconstrued it, so thus he feel defensive, and then thus express it negatively. So that is a good example of how it's good for us to learn, to understand what conflict management is all about, and understands about feelings and emotions. Thus, the more we understand about feelings and emotions, the higher our EQ could be enhanced.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I do coach a lot of leaders and some CEOs, right, how to increase their EQ as well. So
Yeah,
EQ
yeah.
actually is something that can be enhanced. It can be increased.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Okay.
not something like you're born with, and then some people say, "Oh, if I'm born with it or without it, that's it, right? There's no hope. There's no. It can't be helped." Actually, it can. Yeah.
That is the
So
good
it's
news. You can learn it, right? You can learn and
yes,
improve it also. Yeah, yeah. I want to
yes.
come back quickly to the what you just mentioned. I think the aspect is very interesting. And when you say, okay, mediation is mostly amongst two parties, right? And okay, you can somehow fix it. Like it's maybe in a company is the worst can be even a team against a team or something like that. But
Mm,
in social media, what we see also is these so-called, sorry for the term, shit storms, right? Where someone posts something, well, not very well defined, maybe, or maybe intentionally want to provoke, and then it creates like really a shit storm. That means like thousands or 100,000 of people will react to that
mm,
post, which can result in very bad. Well, can have very bad outcomes for the one who posted, like losing the job, losing sponsors, things like that. How do you recommend to approach that in the end? That's also kind of crisis management that you mentioned at the very beginning.
mhm. Yes. So, for example, if you have won a certain awards, like Miss Universe award, for example, right? I'm not referring to specific person, right? Usually, the organization who have a PR department to support and help in case you say something or being misconstrued by the public, then the PR department will help you. Otherwise, right, it's good for the individual or this winner to be trained, to learn, to be coached, right, how to deal with a crisis situations, and understand more about communications in such a way that allows them to speak from a higher EQ perspective, rather than a reactions because of emotional outbursts. Most uh, crisis that happens whereby they say something that leads to outcry by the public or even by the media, and to the point that their sponsors pull back their sponsorship on them. That's because of their competencies of the uh, response to such conflict, or their EQ level is not that high. What they can do is to be able to brush it and then learn it, how to deal with that.
Yeah.
In the course of my work, I have also trained even senior country leaders or country managers uh, for tourism board, for example, how to deal with crisis situations. Especially if you, for example, if you are a head of a tourism board, and then usually every country, the head of the tourism board also need to deal with the ministry or the minister of tourism. And if the minister that is not that competent and say things which is in detriment of their role, usually that's where the director of the tourism board will step up and support and help. Same goes with what we could have seen in the other ministry as well. For example, in Malaysia, Ministry of Health, when there's certain challenges or crises, right? You know, if the certain role player are not able to do it well, the head of the ministry or head of the department will step up to support. So that is crucial for individual to be able to increase their ability or their competencies in this area.
Yeah. Okay. Understand. Thank you so much, Garry. And the time flies like crazy. I just want to mention also. So you're owning, of course, companies that you mentioned it early, that you help people with mediation, also with EQ. I think people can reach out to you directly on LinkedIn, probably. To get in contact with you, learn more about it, and well, I also recommend to follow your profile because there's always interesting posts about these topics there also. So
thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Garry, for your time, sharing your knowledge, your experience, and thanks also to you, the audience, for watching and listening to this episode. I hope I can see we'll see you all next week again to a new episode of Pat's Chat. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Stay safe.